Good evening, everyone, and it's very good to welcome you this evening. My name is Paul Kazik. I'm the Group Chief Executive of the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the third and final in our short series with our partners, Prospect Magazine, commemorating 100 years since the death of our founder, Joseph Rowntree. Joseph Rowntree lived at a time of very profound change, social and economic change, technological change, and political change. And in many respects, he was a pioneer in what became over time a new political economy based around the welfare state through trials and experimentations, mainly in York, which is where we are based, but also inspiring people across the country. We tend to look back at that time now as a time of deep transition, as we would call it at JRF. And we also look at our current context as a time when we think we should also be in a deep transition. When we think about the social and economic challenges we face today, and in the ecological crisis, and indeed a growing political crisis, we believe that our job is to help shape and speed up a transition to a new political economy. We do that in a few different ways. The first is that we try and shift the terms of the debate, and hopefully this evening we'll make a small contribution to that work. Secondly, we look to support and shield the new, the pioneers who, a bit like Joseph Rowntree himself, are trying to build the new in today's context. And we support various pioneers, not just in York and around our region, but across the country. And thirdly, we look to invest in what we call the infrastructure of transition. So what is it that we need to build more of in order to support the work of transitioning to a new political economy? And that might be about fresh insights, which we make publicly available. It might be about fostering grassroots movement building and power in the grassroots. It might be around imagination and hope, key ingredients for moving to a new political economy. If you want to find out more about the work of JRF, we have cards, which hopefully you'll have been able to pick up upstairs, which will take you through to our website with more information. Now, about 20 years before Joseph died, he wrote a document which we call our founding memorandum, in which he set out the kind of work he wanted the organisations carrying his name to take forward after his death. And one of the core messages from that was that we should focus on what he would call the underlying causes, the more structural causes of poverty and social injustice, not, as he would say, the superficial manifestations. Don't run a soup kitchen, he would say. Try and understand why people need soup kitchens. And that's very much the inspiration for the work we do today. When you read that document, if you ever do, and we do frequently as a sort of North Star for our organisation, what's quite striking is it doesn't talk just about income, which is quite often what poverty is thought to be about, and Joseph Rowntree's work is thought to be about, but actually it gets into deeper questions around power and wealth and ownership, and particularly land, and of course housing, which in many respects Joseph's work is synonymous with experimental housing work, including the development of New Earswick in York, which as a housing trust we are very proud to continue to run. So it feels very appropriate that the third and final of our sessions today is around the subject of housing, a system which undoubtedly here in the UK is very broken indeed. You may have noticed that we are one speaker short, and we had hoped that Andy Burnham would at least be able to dial in this evening to join us. Unfortunately, I'm sure you'll understand the pressures of time on his diary. He is not going to be able to join us, but we have got an excellent panel and very much looking forward to the conversation. And on that note, I'll hand over to Alan.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the JRF for organising this really important series of events. And I know from the previous two that the audience is going to be packed with people who have got great expertise and experience, and importantly questions. So please have your questions ready for the last quarter of an hour of this hour. But with this event tonight, we're discussing the turning point, as Paul said, in the UK's housing story. We know it's a grim story, as Paul's just said. The prices are up. Ownership is out of reach to many. Too many people are stuck without a secure place that they can call home. We've a government. The good news is that we've got a government that says this is their top priority, but many people are sceptical about whether they can actually deliver. And obviously, it's broader than a UK issue. Many cities are now grappling with this same challenge. So how do we stop talking about the housing crisis, and how do we start ending it? Well, as Paul says, we've got a very good panel. I'm just going to very briefly introduce them. So Bill Blaine here is a market strategist, 4 decades of experience across global finance. He leads Windshift Capital. He heads the alternative assets at Shard Capital, and writes the widely read and enchantingly titled Morning Porridge blog. He's formerly at Bear Stearns, HSBC appointed Honorary Professor of Economics at Heriot-Watt University in 2023. To his left, we have Teija Ojenkoski, who is CEO of the Y Foundation. That's how we say it in English, anyway. Finland's largest non-profit landlord and a key player in the country's globally recognized efforts to end homelessness. With more than 20 years' experience in social housing, a PhD in urban geography, she leads work to build partnerships and advocates for policies that ensure everyone has a home. And then finally, we have Maria Cisternas, an architect who's coordinated urban policies for Barcelona City Council, led land and housing projects in Catalonia more generally. She promotes affordable housing actions across Catalonia with the Habitat 3 Foundation, and advises Girona City Council, that's where she lives, on urban and housing policy, and writes on urban issues for Diaria Ara. So first I'm going to ask them each to start briefly by laying out their brief overview of their thoughts of housing policy in Britain today, or wherever you want to place it. Bill, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, well, thank you very much for inviting me here tonight. I mean, housing policy in the UK is a complete and utter mess. We now have a government that is committed to sorting it, but we need to start off from the perspective that over the last 14 years, we are now in our 17th housing minister, such as the lack of priority given to solving it. And that has resulted in a real crisis, especially here in London, but also in all the other major cities and conurbations. And that is that it's almost impossible for young people at the start of their careers to get any kind of security in their accommodation. Now, this is not talking about homelessness. This is talking about the young professionals who are looking to start their lives and build their careers. And if they can't get security of accommodation, then they can't begin the process of family formation. And if they can't get the process of family formation occurring, then that just accelerates the already developing demographic crisis that we're going to have. Now, we have the ridiculous situation just now where attempts to change that are simply making the problem worse as private landlords exit the market, leaving people struggling, too many people chasing too few flats. And when you have a situation where in London the average salary is something like £44,000, which sounds high, but rents are approaching £1,500, it simply does not leave enough people money to continue and thrive. So what we need to do is find solutions for this. And it's not a solution of building lots of executive rabbit hutches on green fields throughout the shires of southern England. It's about building 2-bedroom flats quickly, efficiently, and cheaply in the cities. And to do that, you can use things like modular construction. But of course, that all disappeared because of the problems with the planning. What we need is a really grown-up, connected, consequential housing policy for the UK. And I think this is part of a process that is beginning to happen.
That was brilliant and brilliantly concise. Teija, see if you can match it for both brilliance and concision.
And thank you for having me. I will tell you briefly why I'm here, because I come from Finland and we have managed to create quite good housing policy. We have practically ended homelessness due to the poverty. We have never ended to build social housing in Finland. After Second World War, We were in a situation where we had to house 400,000 people when we lost part of our country to Russia. So we were then about 3.5 million people then, and we have to house 400,000 people. And that needed quick decisions and good politics. And then we also created that state-subsidized housing system, and we never stopped it. And that's one of the reasons. We never stopped to build state-subsidized homes. And that's why we have reached the situation that we have been the only country in the world that has managed to reduce the amount of homeless people through to the COVID times and through decades. We have now officially under 4,000 homeless people in Finland, and that includes rough sleepers, sofa surfers, and other forms of homelessness. And second, we have quite generous housing allowance, and that guarantees for people living possibilities through the hard economical times. And third, we have created that Finnish housing first model for people experiencing homelessness. First you give home, and after that you provide all the tailor-made support they need. And that has been a combination that has worked, and we have created quite good working housing policy. Of course we have problems, but we have been like a global laboratory, and we have shown what works. And I think these ideas are also adaptable here.
Fascinating. Maria, give us your opening overview.
Well, thanks. First of all, I would like to thank Prospect Magazine and the Joseph Rowntree Foundation for organizing this exchange between countries, which I think is very useful, and it shed some light in what can be done. Of course, for us, coming from Spain, Finland is the reference. But I have to make a historical review on housing policies in Spain, and unfortunately, after the civil war in the year 39 until 75, there was a dictatorship in Spain, which built a lot of public housing units. But what happened is that somehow these housing units, which were made with public subsidies, have been transferred into the private sector. So now Spain's administration almost has no land. The Ministry of Defense, Health, Justice, and Education ministries do have some land, but the Ministry of Housing, which has been appointed now, it's a new one, because for years there hadn't been a Ministry of Housing, has no public land where affordable homes can be built now. Also, due to land speculation processes, you know, the 2008 financial crisis hit very hard in Spain, and the need to protect, also now the ecological imperative and the need to preserve natural land and rural land is going to make it increasingly difficult to transform land for residential uses. So this has shaped in Spain a strong public opinion shared by the left and the right, and that's what worries me, against urban development. For an architect, I'm an architect. Even if we inevitably are optimistic by vocation, and I think there's a solution there and there's a path to build these homes, it's harsh to read newspapers every day containing a lot of opinions against city transformation processes. Urban planning has become now the main field of political attacks. And with this, it's very difficult to arrive to a solution to somehow address the housing issue simultaneously in a lot of different cities in Catalonia. So that's my starting point to share.
Brilliant. Well, thank you all three for those overviews. Teija, I'm going to start with you because you've spoken inspiringly about Finland and its record. When you look at the UK, what do you think that we've got wrong? Finland's got so many things right. What have we been doing wrong?
I would say that you have done a lot of right in the history. You are the country who has created the social housing a few hundred years ago, and you have created many systems, but maybe you have lost political consensus. And the same idea that in whole Europe we have a little bit lost. We have financialized the housing. And we don't see that the market doesn't solve the housing questions about from 10 to 20 to 30% of population. You always need some kind of intervention of a society for housing sector. And I think you have got your moments in history when you have changed your politics, and now we see the results, and not very good results. You always have to take care of some part of people because they are here among us. They don't disappear anywhere. So we have to secure the housing because it's also securing whole society. And you do really good work around Britain, for example, on the homelessness sector. I would say Scotland, that we discussed before this event, they are doing really good work there. But there's a lack of coordination nationally. There's 2 points. You have the solutions here. It just needs political will and national coordination. I think those are the 2 first things to start.
Although we did stop building, and we sold a lot of housing stock, which you've never done.
We never did that, no. And I think through the times you always need the society's intervention, the political intervention to housing sector. And although the amount how much we build state subsidized homes, social housing and affordable homes, it has reduced through decades, and it has changed. But it has also, the amount we have built in Finland, it has also stabilized all those resistant times, construction sectors, hard times there, and it has reduced unemployment when you put effort on to build social housing during recession times. And that has been some kind of economical equipment in Finnish society too. And I think that might be quite wise to take that part. We haven't given all the housing and the housing for state subsidized homes. It's about now the amount of state subsidized homes is about 11% in whole housing stock. But I think that we have never stopped, and that's very important. There's the continuity in it. It's very small amount here. The percentage I don't remember exactly, differs in different countries. Couple, 3-5%. But I absolutely think when I have read the articles here, it's too little, and we can see this historical amount of homeless people, for example, here, and as you describe, people with decent income and education, they can't find any more homes. So it's also a big political question. But maybe we can give states, other people do it, and some ideas too, what can be done.
Just tell us a bit more about the Y Foundation.
Yes.
And the work you do and how you fund it and how you sustain it.
Yeah, we are part of the Finnish housing policy. We are one of the equipments. We are the we provide homes for people. We build our homes or buy them. We take a loan from the bank, and the state gives the guarantee, and also gives them interest subsidy. And that guarantees the level of the rent is I think it's pretty low compared to market prices. And that's rent those homes for people in need, with low incomes or experiencing homelessness. Third of our housing stock is for people experiencing homelessness, and 2/3 is for people with low incomes, single families, retired people, young people with low incomes, unemployed people, like that. And they pay the cost-based rent themselves, but how they can pay it, they get the benefits. So the benefits are big enough so they can cover the rent and the living costs. So that system that works in Finland. You have a different system a little bit, but it's always adaptable in many ways, and every country has to find their own solutions. I don't say that's the only one that works. There might be many systems that works, but we have been part of that system, and as you told earlier, we are the largest national non-profit landlord in Finland. So we provide a lot of homes for people in need, and we are proud of that. Yeah,
We should be. From the sublime to whatever the opposite of sublime is.
Ridiculous, usually.
So, what's the single lever? Is there a single lever that Starmer should reach for, should be bold?
Yes, there is a magic button that could instantly solve everything. Unfortunately, there's not. Very interesting what you're saying about social housing, because that's where the consensus has taken over. In fact, you say that we don't have political consensus, but ever since 1979, and Margaret Thatcher completely changed the basis of UK housing by making it an aspiration to own your own home, which has created the move away from rental accommodation and everyone trying to get in the housing ladder. It's a great thing to do, but it's also had enormous consequences that never really got addressed. So we stopped building social housing. We let people buy up whatever they can. And as the supply becomes scarce, it becomes a matter of how much people can leverage themselves through high mortgages to get on that level. And we've now got to the stage where it's broken. And if I can just bring in one thing here, which will sum up the disaster that now faces us, and it's something I call the barista event horizon. Now, as everybody in this room and watching the TV knows, any society only works on the basis of how good your morning coffee is. If you cannot get a good cup of coffee in the morning, that's it, the economy collapses immediately. History teaches us that. But here in London, we've got to the stage where to get a decent barista is becoming increasingly impossible because none of them can afford the rent to stay within 100 miles of London. I get the train up from Southampton in the morning to work in the city, and there are people going into jobs in London because that's the closest they can live. And this is true across the whole economy. We're seeing people exiting London because they simply can't afford it. And this is because there is no social housing. There is no rental, affordable rental stuff. Now, if doing my day job, which is raising finance for private capital investments, if I go to one of the big UK real money funds, that's the insurance companies and the pension funds, and say, hey, we want to build a block of affordable rental homes, when they think affordable, they're thinking about, 700,000 for a 2-bedroom flat. That's simply not affordable. And if you see what they're willing to finance they will finance the construction of flats, but they're wanting an economic return on that. We need to get away from just purely economic returns and look at what the effective returns are going to be. Now, it's very, very easy or it was very easy for county councils to go out and borrow money from the public purse to construct social housing, but that is no longer the case because most of them are effectively bust. And if they are lending money or building affordable flats for the housing associations, well, again, that becomes a difficulty in finance. So you ask if there's a magic button to solve this. And one of the ideas that we've discussed is the idea of a national home loan fund where institutions who are seeking to build rental accommodations or social housing can get a very simple and easy source of cash to do so. And they would come to the National Housing Fund where they would be able to get the senior debt and possibly even the equity they need to build the kind of homes that I was talking about earlier, the inner city flats, which could be built on the waste ground that we have in every single city, which includes unused railway space, and also knocking down many of the offices that are simply not required anymore. It's going to be exceptionally difficult to convert most of these into decent housing. So shunt them down, recycle the materials and use modular construction to do it. But the key thing is the access to that finance. And then, of course, the problem is, how do you finance it? Well, this is one of the issues that I'm concerned with the current government. I do go back to the comment you made that we don't have political consensus. I would make the comment that since Margaret Thatcher, we've effectively had nothing but a succession of good and bad Conservative governments. Everyone in this room has their suspicions about Starmer and his government, but they're probably the best Conservative government the UK's had, certainly for the last 14 years. But they're not thinking in terms of being a social-facing government because they're so constrained by the Liz Truss effect, which is if you spend money, the bond market will create a crisis. Now, the bond market is the most important force in the universe. Nothing is more important than the truth that the bond market tells you. And Liz Truss demonstrated that when she launched her unfunded programme of spending. It was very quickly reflected in a breakdown in confidence in the UK. And Starmer and Chancellor Reeves are very aware of this. But we don't need to borrow more money directly as the UK to fund the kind of housing fund that I'm talking about. It could be done with government support through something we call a Keep Well agreement, which is basically the promise of the government, if there's a problem, we'll support it. So it's not a guarantee. It's legalese, financial. People would expect the government to bail us out. But I also believe that many of the financial institutions that are currently financing private capital investments into residential housing, they would buy bonds issued by this institution. These things are doable. They don't need to be avoided. And I think the government could be more imaginative in how we create the finance to then start a series of building of replacement social housing, rental accommodation, and affordable rents. It could all be done with a bit of imagination. Sorry for being so long.
No, but given that Starmer's promised 1.5 million houses and he hasn't got that long in which to build them, is it mainly finance? Is that the main problem, or is it the planning laws?
Well, the planning laws, as we all know, are they are Byzantine. I've been involved in a separate planning issue, which is about building a quarry. And you come across the way that the British planning system works, and it is just frankly scary. They don't speak the same language we do. It's a completely different environment, and they just drag on interminably. Nobody can understand what's going on unless you are part of that professional band of people who understand planning. So yes, it is a block. That's one problem. The other problem is the UK home builders want to build the optimized house that makes them the most amount of profit, which is not the kind of accommodation we need to address this economic problem of housing security to get people working again. We need to, one of the areas that I've been financing or trying to finance over the last 15 years has been modular construction. Modular construction is fantastic. It can be relatively low skilled. You can build the stuff, stick it in the back of a lorry, take it off. You can build up to 15 stories very, very quickly using modular. Every single modular company I know has folded because of the delays in the planning system and the delays in getting confirmed orders for their stuff. But if we were to have a planning fast track for inner city built on grey land, brownfield sites and railway land, and get these companies functioning again, it could be done much quicker. It would require, a complete sea change in the way that we think about things. But we need to address this in the same way as we would address a wartime economy, by actually getting things done. And it could happen. Modular construction, railway land, brownfield sites and city, stick up flats. Now, I don't know how you then address the problem is every time when I come into London, you pass Nine Elms on the river, and then you pass all these beautiful new flats that have been built by the railway. If you pass them in the dark, there'll be 2 or 3 lights on in each, because they're all bought offshore and nobody's living in them because the rents are too high.
We might come back to that. Maria, one of the lessons one might take from your opening remarks is that you need a good dictatorship to have a good... But, tell us about your experience in Girona and how that matches the experience here in Britain, towns like Birmingham and Manchester or Bristol.
Yeah, just to continue on the dictatorship issue, just to make it clear, they reacted very late after the Civil War. It took 20 years for the dictator to start the construction, and then he built a lot of homes in a very short period of time. And the legacy of that heritage is very difficult to manage now, because it's the construction of physical ghettos, of neighborhoods that are physically not connected to historical cities, and that makes it very difficult to socially integrate. Whenever a person ameliorates its economic stability, they move away from that neighborhood. And that makes it, for those type of neighborhoods, difficult areas of the cities to manage, which somehow explains people's aversion to construction of social housing. It's that legacy that people have in mind when now they oppose to the construction of new homes. You were saying, is it a matter of planning or a matter of financing? I think there's a scope also for innovating in planning solutions.
Having good design should be part of the solution.
Somehow we all have inherited an urban planning that was based on the egalitarian distribution of rights, of materializing property rights between property owners of land. But that excluded from the equation the right of future tenants, the whole citizenry. Somehow I think when people oppose to urban planning applications, it's because they think, or at least in Spain, they anticipate the speculation that will happen there. It's like they bought this for very few money, and then they're gonna do an urban planning scheme that will maximize this, and the result pricing of the final housing units will be unaffordable for everyone. I think that planning has to anticipate those fears and give guarantees. Give more transparency to the planning process. How much has the land costed? Favor different forms of tenure. Maybe the part that the developer has to seize to the city remain public and not be able to sell it to keep it for future generations. So I think there's a whole range of innovation there that can help to generate a consensus for what has to be built. Also, in terms of industrialization, I read not long ago about Churchill's program for prefab homes. If I'm not wrong, he built 400,000 units in 6 years after the World War, and he delivered all those homes that Finland also delivered. Now, culturally,
it wasn't actually Churchill; it was a Labour government.
All right, all right. I'm sorry, I'm not the specialist in housing policies in the UK, but those homes are still there, if I understand it well. Some have been changed by housing estates. Culturally speaking, for example, in Spain, it's very difficult to build a program like this because it requires a huge land consumption. Building a home of only two floors. Culturally speaking, in Spain, we know how to live densely and packed, and people living in 8 floors, superimposed. So that makes it that the impact of what that the pieces of city making that are to be built have more impact, and this needs to be addressed with some sensibility. Also, we have to think that the emergency is now, but what we build now will last for 200 years. So we have the duty also to think what the quality of the final product we deliver is. And another idea that Spain is working on, which I understand Finland is also working, is thinking that with the rent controls in Spain, which has been very controversial, this has launched a political message that rents are going to be controlled. This has made that private equity funds and bankings that had huge packages of homes that they gained through the homes evictions because of unpaid mortgages after the crisis, they were selling them. Now they're not selling them anymore because nobody wants to build these packages of homes because they're not going to be able to increase the rents. That creates a scenario in which it's convenient for the public administration to buy these homes that are secondhand, that are already built, and that are now more affordable than they will be in 10 years' time. So that creates also an opportunity for the public sector to actually buy packages of homes that are already in cities.
As an architect, what do you think of Bill's modular construction flats?
I think if we think about it, windows are produced industrially already. But also the image of the modular construction sometimes is very strange to the rest of the city. It looks different. It doesn't take into account the context. So I think we have to find, and that's the art of the architect. I'm sorry, but we keep being important in that. The art of architecture is to find the right or the most convenient approach to industrialization, because sometimes only doing the facade may help, with the same types of windows may help in economizing the scale and the finance. But also we have to bear in mind the cost of the land. It's not only the production industrially of every unit, but the cost of the land.
Yeah.
I would like to say that I've been in few projects where we have built modular homes, and I think architecturally it's not so big problem because you can make the facade whatever you like, and I think it's a clever system. But what's very important is the price of the land and the planning system, and all the problem we just hear today. So that might be one of the biggest way, the fastest way to create new homes. But it's not always only the walls and the roof, as you described. It's also the society, and create good environment, and because all we need is a good society. To give a home for a homeless person, it's not the only solution, to give all the support they need, but also the society to survive and see the prospect, what they can do in the future. How can they find love and work and everything like that? That's normal. And I think it's a very important thing to say that it's not only the walls, it's always, it's multidimensional. It's
Community.
Community, yes, good, yeah.
Bill, you mentioned going past all those empty houses that are all being bought up by foreign investors. What would you do about that if you were made Prime Minister for the day?
Oh gosh, that's a tough one. Do we nationalise them or take them over and upset all the people that invested in the UK? That's a tough one. But the fact is, if we do end up building, say, 500,000 rental flats in London, it would change the pricing dynamics of the London housing market. And at the moment, I think it's about 15 times income for a mortgage to buy a simple flat in London, 11 times in parts of the rest of the country, just sheer unaffordability. Prices have to change. It would be great, though, if my National Housing Fund also had the option to go and buy properties from the market, not necessarily at market price, but at a price that would make sense. And I'm thinking here of the marvellous estate out in East London that they built for the Olympics. And that included a whole series of rental accommodations that were supposed to be rented off afterwards. And I discovered recently that some of these blocks, which had been allocated as key worker blocks, somehow ended up getting sold to American hedge funds. And now, rather than being occupied by workers from the nearby hospital, are now rented out to Chinese students because they will pay even more than the councils or tenants were willing to pay in rent. So that is a failure there. We've got to make sure that if we have accommodation that is built with government subsidy or without, and it's targeted towards addressing the housing crisis, that it doesn't end up getting abused by finance.
We've got 15 minutes, and I know you've all been storing up your questions. I can see one there. I'm just going to check if there are any online at the moment. Oh, there's one. Let's start with an online question if we've got a microphone.
So this is from Sunethra Mendes, who asks, over-financialisation of the housing sector, supported by regressive tax policies like REITs. REITs, thank you, has led to housing becoming a tax-efficient asset and the housing market becoming unsaturated. How have other countries managed these risks? What are the most effective tools to tame the financialisation of housing in the UK?
I do hope you're not going to ask me that question.
Go on.
I'm really not. I really don't know. It's a great question because I haven't actually thought about how other countries have done this. I suspect that housing is something that should find a natural kind of balance. It reaches an equilibrium, but that hasn't happened in the UK because of the lack of supply, which has pushed up prices so quickly. And we've now got into a situation where they're unaffordable. How do you make sure that you reach an equilibrium level which is optimal for the whole economy? Well, yes, you could address it by changing the tax benefits, but as we're saying just now in the UK, as soon as you change rental laws, all the private landlords want to sell because they're terrified that they're left with a 2-year process to evict a tenant who's no longer paying. So there are always going to be consequences, and we really need to think quite deeply about how you change regulations.
Question, yeah, there's two. Where's the microphone? Just
It's a follow-up question, if that's okay. There's a little bit of a game going on here, if I don't mind. I'm Mike Keevely from Granger. We have a housing emergency in the UK. We don't have enough houses. And people talking about swapping tenures and ownership doesn't build more houses. So for all those people that have had to leave their owner-occupied house and sell them, or their buy-to-let, it doesn't add houses.
No.
Someone's renting those houses, right? They're evicted. They're sold into the social sector, perhaps. It's another house by tenure, but not by volume. And unless you get more houses built, which is why you need private equity and subsidy from government, you've got no chance of solving this problem, I'd say. So my point is, why it's got to be about building more homes, right, of all tenures, but particularly affordable.
That's a statement, not a question, which I completely,
It is, sorry.
Which I completely agree with.
Is it about?
I completely agree.
Let's have a question here. Yeah.
Sorry, it's another statement. It's Piers Williamson from Sustainability for Housing. Until a year ago, Bill, I ran a fund, as you describe. It invested £8.2 billion of real money capital in affordable housing, and it sourced its funding from real capital and the European Investment Bank. European Investment Bank. So it does exist, but subsidised housing needs subsidy. And in the last 3 years, interest rates have doubled. Let's say inflation. We've had an inflation bubble going through the market. Till 3 years ago, actually, we were producing quite a lot of housing by historic standards. But the volume house builders are exposed to all that inflation. Most of the modular constructors of the big ones have gone bust. Actually, some of the volume house builders are producing their own sub-modular factories. My observation going forward is we've got a comprehensive spending review in whenever it is, 2 days' time.
Exactly.
So subsidised housing needs subsidy. If capital subsidy isn't there, a lot of the comments that you are making about planning, and we've got Kate sitting over there who knows more about this than anyone. Working at planning, resourcing planning, not trying to reinvent the wheel, but actually putting decent resources around it, taking away from the or trying to address the adversarial process that is planning on any scale. And I suspect producing resourcing is part of that. And keeping inflation down and letting interest rates should stabilize or drop slightly. That will start bringing the volume house builders who have all the resources that you need to actually build stuff back into the game. We're not going to do this overnight, and you're right, there isn't a silver bullet. Sorry,
Another excellent statement. Now we want a question. Yes.
I have a question.
You're right, a question here.
Thank you. I'm Mark Easton from the BBC. You've talked a lot about supply. I'm just thinking about places that people want to live in. You've talked about community and society. You talked about the ghettos that have been left. We've been through this in Britain. We went through this in the 60s and the early 70s, and we built lots of islands of deprivation. My question is, and I'm particularly actually to Tia, I want to find out what Finland did. How do we ensure that we build all these houses, but we don't just build problems for the future, that we actually create real places where people can thrive?
Really good question. Tia.
Thank you. Quite complicated to answer, but I tell an example from Finland. When we are zoning, we are the city planning. There's mostly 20% is state subsidized homes, and the others are commercial produced houses, and that's the mixing policy. Social mixing policy is quite widely adapted in Finnish planning system. And then social mixing also inside those market-based homes, because there's a lot of investors that's bought apartments and then put into the rental market. And people get the housing allowance that little bit easier, make it easier that there's is mixed. The community is mixed in social base. So, but we are so few in Finland, 5.5 million people. So it has been easy. It's less than in London. So, but we have shown that works there. But I have to say also, it is very important to understand that prevention and to prevent housing problems is always cheaper than to let them exist.
question here at the front.
Yes, thank you. Hello, my name is Anthony Breach. I'm Associate Director at Centre for Cities, where I'm the lead on housing and planning. So one thing that's pretty clear if you look internationally is that we have an especially unusually bad housing situation in the UK. So we've calculated we're missing about 4.3 million homes compared to the average Western European country. However, one thing that's also unusual about the UK is we have a very strange planning system. So while other countries have zoning systems, like Taya has just mentioned, we have a discretionary system where every decision is taken case by case. And even if you follow the rules of a local plan, you can still be rejected by planners. So the government seems to sort of agree with this analysis that the planning system is part of the problem, at least for the housing crisis. But they are trying to reform the existing discretionary system rather than moving towards a zoning system. Should the government instead be thinking about moving towards a European-style zoning system, or can the current system be saved, as it were? Thank you.
Maria, do you want to answer that one?
I would change the question because I come from a country where the zoning system is very clear, direct, and planning applications are based on an Excel sheet. There's no question. It's mathematics. And still we have issues, social issues. And because our profession is very exposed. We build cities and everyone around has the right to have a say in that. I think it's democracy. And what I would require, I think we have better techniques than 20 years ago. We have the capacity to renderize, to do 3Ds, to, beyond the drawings, explain how we imagine the community, what are going to be the gains for that. And then it's a negotiation. It's tough, but planning is a negotiation. It's a civic act. And even with an Excel sheet, we don't have the Prime Minister banning a planning application, but we have the public opinion sometimes, and mayors losing elections because of that. So I would, in that sense, I would recommend from the very beginning developers to think also from the citizen perspective, local people who have been living there. I studied here, so I followed some planning applications, and there was a legal team supporting local neighborhoods. I thought that was very informed, and they spent a lot of money for a planning application, and finally the developer couldn't. It was a planning in Ealing Broadway, and he didn't get the permission to do that. He spent a huge amount of money and couldn't make it. I thought at some point, maybe someone could have told the developer at the mid stage of the production how to change, because the huge problem was a tall building which was too high. Maybe the solution would have come from a conversation, not a jury, but that's democracy. And
I think I'm conscious my range of vision is limited here. There's a question there, yeah. Microphone's on its way.
Hi, I'm Nick Hardwick from the London Housing Foundation. I suppose my point to Bill might be that if you want to do some coffee, you need to go to somewhere like Middlesbrough or Stoke. You know, what you were describing, I think, was a very acutely London problem, and some of the issues are different in different parts of the country. That's not to say there aren't, of course, the problems elsewhere, but I don't think they're quite as you described in London. What I see happening outside London is that you get what local authorities are doing. They're restricting social housing or their support for social housing to those who are most in need. And then added to that, you have central government agencies like the Home Office and like the Ministry of Justice. That's where their nationally commissioned housing for offenders and asylum seekers is going as well. So in terms of the point I think that Thea was making about islands of deprivation, I think it was you making that point. I don't think those are now in great tower blocks, but I think you do see them in relatively concentrated streets in a number of the most disadvantaged cities. And just to link back to what Theo was saying, I thought what was really striking about what you were saying in terms of your provision for the homeless and your housing first policy was in the context of that was part of a much wider, if you like, range of social housing provision for a much wider remit of people. So I think we create a problem because social housing problem is only for the most disadvantaged largely, whereas it seems to me the Finland scenario is that the most disadvantaged are supported in a context where that support is available to a much wider spectrum. And is that I suppose that's somewhere in there there's a question.
That's a very interesting point that you raise about the existing social housing that we have left that is allocated to those in society most desperately in need. And that's where we put our focus on, young people with trauma or whatever, or solving homelessness or dealing with the consequences of whatever. And that actually disguises the much bigger problem, which is this economic issue of being unable to secure workers to work in London, Manchester, Bristol, at least these three, and possibly some of the other cities as well. And that to me is a danger because it ends up that all the social resources go into the most difficult problem cases where they're the ones that can stay in the towns but are contributing least. Now, I know that sounds almost libertarian in the way that I'm describing it, but that unfortunately is the reality. If we put all our social housing money into solving their problems but not the others, it actually magnifies the problem and makes it even worse at the end of the day. So it's critical that we do address the issue of normal, young, working people with professional jobs who cannot stay in the cities. And I have personal experience of it because my daughter, who is a creative and works for one of the TV companies, has just announced, after losing yet another flat where the landlord wants to sell it, that she's going to give up, she's going to resign from her work, and she's very fortunate, she has an Irish passport, and she's going to move to Spain and look for a job in marketing in Spain instead of living in London. And that, to me, it's a personal tragedy, but that, if it's happening across the whole economy, then it's tragic.
Got time for two more questions. We'll take one there and one right at the back there. Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Ian Mulcahy, Global Director of Cities for Gensler. I guess it's a big question. How do you get politicians to confront the scale of the crisis? Someone pointed out the number we need in the UK isn't 1.5 million, and we have this weird political consensus about trying to get to 1.5 million when we know that's only a fraction of what we actually need. We need 4.3 million. 4.3 million means there's 8.5 million people who are looking for a home. 8.5 million people is the size of London. So that means you need a lot of land. The scale of land you need to build these, whatever the methodology for supply and the finance, the scale of land you need at an extraordinary level. So we now need the equivalent of 8 Birminghams to meet our housing shortage. So we've got to think really, really carefully about what land we're going to use, repurpose to build that housing. Now, we're tinkering around the edges saying grey belt, green belt, this land could be repurposed, that land can be repurposed, and at the same time, the number of houses we're building is actually going down.
Well, it's not just houses you need to build all the infrastructure to go with it as well.
Hospitals, parks.
Can I push you to a question?
The question was at the beginning. How do you get politicians to confront the scale of the crisis?
Well, the good news is at least we have a party in power that has acknowledged that there is a problem. I do get the impression that ever since Brexit, it's simply disappeared from the political agenda of the ruling party at the time. So that's a plus.
Excellent. Good question. Yes, question at the front, and then one more question there, and then we're done. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Oliver Bullied from London Community Land Trust. We're a community-led affordable housing developer in London. I'll try and keep it brief. Should we look at housing as infrastructure and with the associated investment that comes with that? And as an example, HS2, I think in today's terms, is costing about 100 billion, which if you look at it is the equivalent of £100,000 of grant for 1 million homes. So should we look at housing as infrastructure and with funding to go with that at an enormous scale from central government?
I think that's a very nice way of putting it. I mean, this is the kind of thing we need to consider for a holistic approach to solving the UK housing crisis. You cannot just say that it exists on its own. It is part of, we demand a solution as part of a wartime economy, as I said earlier, to solve this.
I could see you nodding, Maria.
Yeah, this in planning, we say we do the reserves of land for public amenities, for community services. But cities are made of housing. We invented cities to live in housing. In that sense, I think it has an economic logic. You only need 30 years to get back the investment. So it's 2 generations. The money that collectively the state puts now in the construction of these affordable homes, in 2 generations, that's going to come back. The only problem is that we vote every 4 years. So no one politically, and that links to your question, no one can capitalize this. So we have to help politicians to do that jump.
I think, yes, final question there. Right at the back.
Thank you. My question is, why no discussion of taxes? Taxes can change the thing. Taxes can stop all those empty flats off the side of the railway, because we are much more generous in our taxation of property than any other place in Europe. If we taxed property ownership, then that would free up a whole lot of property that shouldn't be kept empty. We would also encourage people to downsize from properties that are far too big for them to allow other people to share those properties. There are so many reasons why tax could be used without building anything to increase the amount of property that's available. Any comments from any other panel about why no tax?
I have some data from Spain. Tax policies in Spain have supported the model of home ownership. Between 1979 and 2023, more than 90,000 million euros have been spent on tax deductions for home purchases of a primary residence. Had we invested this money into the provision of an affordable housing system, we would have the money. The money is there, right?
Yeah.
Taxation is a good equipment to make some effort in the housing sector. But I would like to address that housing should be a human right. And to change the view, change the paradigm, and not see it only one person's problem to be without home. It's a society's failure if there is a lot of homeless people. So can the UK afford not to change the mindset in housing policy?
It's you're absolutely right. Taxation is one of the things we need to consider, but it also needs to be put in its context that housing has traditionally been one of the major things that individuals and institutions invest in because of the security. And if we do introduce taxes on being a landowner, you can imagine the conniptions it will send Alison Pearson of the Telegraph into.
That's a very domestic reference, which may be lost on. But it's a good note on. Well, it's a terrible note on which to end. But anyway, we must reach an end.
Destroyed the whole ambience of the evening.
Because it's the end of this series, I want to thank not only tonight's panel but everyone who's contributed. It's been a rich and thoughtful series. Thank you to the audience, to those of you who are joining online as well. Thank you to Paul and JRF for suggesting this and for coming up with these themes and tying it into the original ethos and surviving ethos of JRF. What I think has stood out is the range of voices that we've heard, the urgency of the ideas, the shared ambition, not just to think about the past, but to shape a better future. And that is perhaps the best tribute to Joseph Rowntree's legacy and a reminder of the work that continues at pace and intensively. So if you can put your hands together, Bill, Taya, and Maria have been a fantastic panel. Please thank them. The next urgent matter is to go upstairs and get yourself a drink. And then on your way out later in the evening, please pick up a copy of Prospect and enjoy that too. But thank you again for coming.
Thank you.